What Caleb found in the hidden sub-basement of the Meyerfield Hotel was beyond anything he could have imagined. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. As his flashlight swept across the room, it revealed walls covered in bizarre, arcane symbols that seemed to pulsate unnervingly as if reacting to his presence. In the center of the room, there was a large, stone altar, stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the altar, his camera recording every detail. Scattered around the altar were various objects that looked like ritualistic tools, candles, bowls filled with an assortment of what appeared to be bones, and old, leather-bound books that were open to pages filled with cryptic texts and disturbing illustrations. As he examined the books, Caleb noticed that one of them was a journal, seemingly belonging to Eliza Meyerfield herself. The entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about gateways to another world and communing with entities beyond human comprehension. Eliza wrote about her rituals in great detail, describing them as necessary sacrifices to maintain a barrier between the worlds. Feeling a growing sense of dread, Caleb realized that the hotel's hauntings might not just be the result of a troubled past but were perhaps manifestations of something much more sinister and ancient. The final entry in Eliza's journal was the most disturbing. It was written hastily, with a tone of desperation and fear, warning of a ritual gone wrong and an entity that had been accidentally unleashed. The air in the basement grew colder, and a sense of palpable malevolence filled the space. Caleb's flashlight flickered as if struggling against an unseen force. Just as he was about to speak to his camera, a low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, freezing him in place. The sounds seemed to come from all around him, resonating with the dark energy of the room. Terrified but compelled to continue, Caleb turned his camera to the darkest corner of the basement where the growl had originated. His light dimly illuminated what appeared to be a small, hidden doorway, partially obscured by fallen debris and old furniture. As he cleared the debris to open the door, the air became charged with a static energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Behind the door was a narrow tunnel that descended further into the darkness. Caleb hesitated, aware of the dangers but driven by his need to discover the truth. He entered the tunnel, the walls closing in around him as he moved deeper underground. The tunnel finally opened into a large cavern, and what he found there was horrific. The cavern was filled with statues that were too lifelike to be mere sculptures. They were of people, frozen in expressions of terror and agony. As Caleb's flashlight passed over them, it became clear that these were not statues but petrified victims, their faces eternally captured in their final moments of horror. At the center of the cavern stood a large, black stone that pulsed with a dark light. The air around the stone was distorted, as if the very fabric of reality was thinner there. Whispers filled the cavern, voices begging for help, warning him to leave, and malicious laughs that seemed to mock his fear. Caleb filmed everything, his voice barely a whisper as he narrated the unspeakable horror he was witnessing. He knew he should leave, that he should run from this nightmare and never look back, but the journalist in him needed answers. He approached the black stone, his camera pointed at its pulsing surface, and reached out to touch it. As his fingers brushed against the stone, the cavern shook violently. The air erupted with screams, and the ground beneath him cracked open, emitting a blinding light. Caleb stumbled back, his camera falling to the ground as he tried to shield his eyes from the light. The last thing the camera recorded before it cut out was Caleb's silhouette against the intense light, his shadow elongated and distorted as if being pulled into the fissure in the ground. The screen went black, leaving his audience in stunned silence, wondering what fate had befallen the brave journalist. The mystery of the Meyerfield Hotel had deepened, and Caleb's footage would only serve to draw more curious and fearless souls to its haunted halls. As the story paused here, viewers would be left hanging, pondering the depths of the horror that lay beneath the Meyerfield Hotel, eager for the next installment to shed light on the dark secrets that Caleb had uncovered. As the camera's feed snapped back to life, the image was shaky, panning across the cavern floor in a dizzying whirl before finally stabilizing. The fissure that had erupted with blinding light now smoldered with a less intense glow, allowing Caleb's whereabouts to remain uncertain. The camera, apparently knocked from Caleb's grasp, lay on its side, offering a skewed view of the cavern. Minutes passed with eerie silence until faint sounds broke the stillness. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the cavern. The camera's angle caught just the edge of Caleb's shoes as he stumbled back into view, clutching his head, his breathing ragged and labored. He seemed disoriented, struggling to regain his composure. He picked up the camera, turning it to face himself. His face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "I don't know if you can see this," Caleb whispered into the camera, his voice trembling. "But I think I touched something ancient and powerful. I can't explain it. I saw things, visions or memories, I don't know. This place, it's not just haunted. It's a gateway, a thin place where our world and something else meet." Turning the camera away from himself, Caleb aimed it at the black stone. Now inert and much less menacing in appearance, it sat like a dormant beast in the middle of the cavern. "This stone, it's at the heart of it all. I think it's some kind of seal or portal. Eliza Meyerfield must have known about it, tried to control it. But something went wrong." Caleb then moved slowly through the cavern, the camera capturing the eerie, petrified figures. "These people," he continued, his voice a mix of horror and sadness, "they were like us, curious, seeking answers or perhaps thrill. Caught in something they didn't understand." He paused, reaching out to gently touch one of the stone figures, his fingers tracing the forever terror etched into the victim's face. "They're warnings," he said softly. "Warnings that some truths are too powerful, too dangerous." Determined to learn more, Caleb retraced his steps back to the tunnel that led him to this unearthly cavern. The tunnel, however, seemed different now. The walls pulsed subtly with a faint, rhythmic throb that wasn't there before, or perhaps hadn't been noticeable. The whispers that had once filled the air were now silent, but the sense of being watched, of being not alone, was stronger than ever. The camera shook slightly as Caleb walked, his steps unsteady as if the ground beneath him was subtly shifting. He made his way back to the sub-basement, where he paused, looking around with a paranoid glance. "I feel like the hotel knows I'm here, like it's aware," he muttered into the camera. From the sub-basement, Caleb decided to explore the library once more, convinced there had to be more information about the rituals and the stone. His flashlight swept across the dusty shelves, stopping on books that now seemed to stand out as if calling for his attention. Pulling out several volumes that contained references to otherworldly gateways and protective rituals, Caleb laid them out on a table, his camera capturing the pages filled with arcane symbols and complex diagrams. As he pored over the texts, trying to piece together the puzzle, a sudden loud crash echoed through the library. The camera spun towards the source of the noise. A bookcase had fallen over, its contents spilled across the floor. But there was no sign of what could have caused it. "Is someone there?" Caleb called out, his voice echoing in the large room. There was no reply, only the sound of his own breathing and the distant, unidentifiable creaks and moans of the old hotel. The tension in the air was palpable, a sense of urgency pressing down as if time itself were running out. Caleb's eyes were wide, darting around the room as he continued to film. He knelt to pick up some of the fallen books, and that's when he noticed it, an old, almost decayed notebook that hadn't been there before. He opened it carefully, and as he read, his eyes widened in shock. The notebook contained writings that mirrored those in Eliza's journal, but these were not her writings. They were dated years after her disappearance, penned in a frantic hand. The entries spoke of someone else attempting the ritual, someone desperate to seal the breach that Eliza had accidentally opened. But like her, they had failed, and the consequences of their actions were undocumented, the entries ending abruptly. Caleb looked up from the notebook, his expression one of dawning horror. "It didn't end with Eliza," he whispered into the camera. "Someone else knew about this, tried to fix her mistakes. And now, I'm caught in the same cycle. Something about this hotel, it doesn't just haunt you, it pulls you in, makes you part of its history. Caleb's voice was heavy with realization and fear as he continued to sift through the scattered books and papers. Each piece seemed to unveil more of the hotel's dark legacy, a story not just of supernatural occurrences, but of a deeply troubled past that reached out through the ages. The hotel wasn't merely a setting for hauntings, it was an active participant, a curator of its own horrific gallery. As night fell outside, the shadows within the library grew deeper and more menacing. Caleb felt the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing against him. The air grew colder, the chill seeping into his bones. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him as he continued to read from the notebook. Suddenly, the faint sound of piano music drifted through the air. Caleb froze, his heart pounding. The music was soft, melancholic, and eerily familiar. It was the same melody he had heard on his first night in the hotel. With camera in hand, he followed the sound, each step cautious and measured as he made his way back to the ballroom. The doors to the ballroom were slightly ajar, creaking ominously as he pushed them open. Inside, the grand piano sat at the far end of the room, bathed in moonlight streaming in through the tall, broken windows. The keys moved subtly, as if touched by invisible fingers, playing the haunting melody. Caleb approached slowly, his camera capturing the surreal scene. As he reached the piano, the music stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. He scanned the room, the camera's light sweeping across the dusty dance floor, the chandeliers that hung motionless from the ceiling, and the rows of empty chairs lined up against the walls. As he turned back to the piano, he noticed something that hadn't been there before, a single sheet of music placed neatly on the stand. Caleb picked it up, his hands trembling as he read the title, The Final Requiem. It was composed by Eliza Meyerfield. The music was complex, filled with sharp, dissonant chords and a melody that spiraled downward, as if pulling the listener into despair. Intrigued and unsettled, Caleb placed the sheet back on the piano stand and pressed a few keys. The sound was discordant, echoing weirdly as if the room itself was altering the acoustics. Feeling a rising sense of dread, Caleb turned to leave the ballroom when he heard it, a soft whisper, almost like a sigh, coming from behind him. He spun around, the camera jerking unsteadily. There was nothing there but the empty room and the silent piano. Yet, the sense of being watched was overwhelming. As he backed towards the doors, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the icy air. Then, all at once, every door in the ballroom slammed shut, plunging him into darkness. The only light came from his camera, which now flickered erratically, struggling against the oppressive darkness. Caleb's breaths came quick and ragged, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the camera. "I'm not alone here. There's something else, something that the rituals were meant to contain or communicate with. It's still here, in the hotel, bound to this place as much as any ghost." He moved slowly towards one of the doors, his hands shaking as he tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped. The whispers grew louder, turning into murmurs of disjointed voices, speaking words he couldn't quite understand. They seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air around him. Caleb turned the camera to face him, his face pale and drawn in the dim light. "If you're seeing this," he said, the words catching in his throat, "then I might not make it out. But I have to try to understand what's happening here, to tell its story." With a deep breath, he turned off the camera, conserving its battery for what might come next. The screen went dark, leaving the sounds of the whispering voices and the soft, melancholic piano melody to fill the silence of the night. The hotel's secrets were deep, woven into its very foundation. And as Caleb was slowly discovering, they were not eager to be uncovered. As he stood in the darkness, surrounded by voices of the past, the Meyerfield Hotel seemed to close in around him, its story far from over, its darkest chapters yet to be told. The whispers grew in intensity, merging into a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at the very edges of Caleb's sanity. Each word, though indistinct, carried a weight of sorrow and warning, enveloping him in a blanket of dread. He felt the air thicken, as if the darkness itself was congealing, tightening around him like a noose. With the camera still off to conserve power, Caleb's only source of light was the weak beam of his flashlight, which flickered as though struggling against an unseen force. He moved cautiously, his steps echoing in the empty ballroom, each sound amplified by the silence that pressed in from all sides. He made his way to the grand windows, the moonlight casting long, sinister shadows across the dance floor. The glass was shattered in places, the jagged edges gleaming like teeth in the dim light. As he approached, a figure appeared outside, one that was indistinct and flickering, like a flame caught in a draft. It was there one moment and gone the next, leaving Caleb to question if his eyes were deceiving him or if the hotel was manifesting its haunted tales right before him. Heart pounding, Caleb returned to the piano. The sheet music titled The Final Requiem still lay there, untouched since he'd last seen it. An overwhelming impulse drove him to try and play it, to perhaps appease whatever spirits lingered in this forsaken place. His fingers pressed down on the keys, the dissonant chords filling the room, resonating with the walls and seemingly stirring the spirits to life. As the melody progressed, the temperature dropped even further, a frost forming on the inside of the windows, creeping across the floor like a living thing. The wind howled through the broken panes, and the entire hotel seemed to groan under the weight of its own tormented history. Then, abruptly, the music stopped. Caleb's hands were forced away from the keys by a power he couldn't see, his fingers numbing with cold. The whispers turned to shouts, angry and pained, echoing around him in a maelstrom of sound that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Frightened beyond reason, Caleb grabbed his camera, turned it on, and started recording once more. He spoke directly into the lens, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. This is more than just a haunted hotel. It's a prison for something ancient, something that was never meant to be disturbed. And I think it wants to be free. The building shivered as if in response, a deep rumble that felt like an earthquake. Cracks spread across the floor tiles, snaking towards the walls, which began to crumble and fall in heaps of plaster and dust. The piano, too, began to shake, its own structure succumbing to whatever force was enveloping the hotel. Caleb turned the camera to capture the destruction, backing towards the exit as he did so. But the doors remained firmly shut, trapping him inside as the room continued to deteriorate. Above the roar of the collapsing room, the melody from the piano resumed, playing by itself, the keys moving rapidly. The tune was clearer now, more demanding, as if urging him to listen, to understand. Panic set in as Caleb realized he was running out of time. He turned the camera back to himself, his back against the door, the chaos reflected in his eyes. "If anyone sees this," he shouted over the noise, "tell the story. Warn them. The Meyerfield Hotel is not just haunted, it's cursed, and the curse is real. Don't let curiosity lead you here. This place, it's alive, and it doesn't want witnesses." Just then, a loud, ear-splitting crack echoed through the room as the ceiling began to cave in. Caleb dove out of the way, the camera falling to the ground, its lens cracking upon impact, but still recording. The feed was now a chaotic blur of movement, dust, and intermittent flashes of what remained of the ballroom. The last few frames showed Caleb, his figure obscured by the settling dust, as he tried to shield himself from the falling debris. His fate was unclear as the footage ran on, the sounds of the crumbling hotel mingling with the haunting melody that played relentlessly in the background. Then, abruptly, the camera feed cut to static, leaving a chilling silence. The story of Caleb Ward and the Meyerfield Hotel ended here, buried under layers of rubble and mystery, the final notes of the final requiem echoing in the ears of anyone who dared watch the footage. The hotel's secrets remained, as alive and as menacing as ever, waiting for the next unwary soul to uncover its dark past and unleash the horrors held within.